Fern Stokes was 36 years old, and she knew exactly what that meant in the language of the frontier. Too old. Too old to bear children easily. Too old to start fresh. Too old to be anyone's first choice. She had been a school teacher in Davenport, Iowa, for 14 years, and she had been a good one, and the school board had let her go anyway, because the new superintendent believed that unmarried women over 35 were a poor influence on young girls, setting an example of spinsterhood rather than wifely virtue. The superintendent had said this to her face, in his office, with his hands folded on his desk, and Fern had looked at him and said, "I have taught more children to read than you have met in your life." And he had said, "That may be, but the policy is the policy." And she had stood up and walked out, and put her life in a trunk, and answered an advertisement in the Nebraska paper, because the alternative was to go back to her sister's house in Davenport, and sleep in the attic room, and slowly disappear. The advertisement read, "Established rancher, 42, seeks capable wife. Must be willing to work. No romantics. Box 14, Birch Creek, Nebraska." Fern had liked the advertisement because it sounded like a man who wanted a partner, not a decoration. She had written a plain letter stating her qualifications: 14 years of teaching, competent cook, strong constitution, no debts, no illusions. And she had included her age because she was not a woman who hid things. The man had written back, "Come on the Tuesday, coach. I will meet you at the depot." His name was Leland Quarles. The Tuesday coach arrived in Birch Creek at noon. Fern climbed down with her trunk and her carpet bag, and her hat straight and her back straight, and looked for a man who matched the advertisement. She found him at the end of the platform, a big man with a red face and new boots, and the self-satisfied expression of someone who has ordered something from a catalog and is waiting to inspect it. Leland Quarles looked at Fern. He looked at her from her hat to her boots, and back again with the slow, evaluating gaze of a man examining livestock, and his face changed. The self-satisfaction drained out of it and was replaced by something that Fern recognized immediately because she had seen it on the superintendent's face in Davenport. The flat, dismissive calculation of a man who has decided that a woman is not what he wanted. "You are older than I expected," he said. "I told you my age in the letter. I did not read it carefully. I was looking at the part about cooking." Fern stood very still. The depot platform was not empty. There were 6 or 7 people standing within earshot. The station agent, a woman with a market basket, 3 men in work clothes, and a lean, quiet man in a duster and a battered hat, who was leaning against the wall of the depot building with his arms folded and his face unreadable. "I am 36, Fern said. Her voice was steady. She had practiced steadiness for 14 years in classrooms full of children. "I cooked for a household of 12 at my sister's before I came west. I can keep accounts, mend harness, and teach any child you put in front of me to read and write and do sums. My age is a fact, not a flaw." Leland Quarles shook his head. "I need a wife who can give me sons. You are past it." The words landed on the platform like stones dropped from a height. The woman with the market basket made a small sound. The station agent looked at his boots. The 3 work-clothed men shifted uncomfortably. The lean man against the wall straightened up. "Quarles," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the way a voice carries when there is nothing wasted in it. "You are talking to a lady." Leland turned. "This is not your business, Garrity. You are making it my business by acting like a fool in public." The man, Garrity, walked forward until he was standing between Fern and Leland, not touching either of them, simply occupying the space in a way that made his position clear. He was not as big as Leland, but he was harder, the way a fence post is harder than a barrel. Thinner, drier, with no give in it. His face was weathered deep, and his eyes were blue and steady, and he was looking at Leland Quarles the way a man looks at a fence that needs pulling down. "This woman rode a coach across 2 states to answer your advertisement," Garrity said. "She told you her age in the letter you did not bother to read. She is standing on this platform with a trunk and her dignity, and you are telling her she is past it. You should be ashamed." "I want what I want, Garrity." "What you want is not worth the air it took to say it." Garrity turned to Fern. He took off his hat. His hair was dark with gray at the temples, and his face was lined from sun and wind, and something else, something deeper, the kind of lines that come from carrying weight alone for a long time. "Ma'am," he said, "my name is Ike Garrity. I have a ranch 3 miles north of here. I am a widower with no children. I am 44 years old, which makes me 8 years older than you, and considerably less qualified to judge anyone's age." He paused. He was not a man who spoke easily, and this was costing him. She could see that. "If you would allow me, I would like to carry your trunk to the boarding house and buy you supper and tell you about Birch Creek, and you can decide for yourself whether this is a town worth staying in." Fern looked at him. She looked at Leland Quarles, who was standing 3 feet away, with a face the color of raw beef. She looked back at Ike Garrity and saw something in his eyes that she had not seen in a man's eyes in a very long time. Respect. Not desire, not calculation, not the measuring look of a man who is deciding what you are worth to him. Just respect, plain and undressed and real. "I would like that very much, Mr. Garrity," she said. Ike picked up her trunk. It was heavy, full of books. She could see him register the weight with a small lift of his eyebrows, and carried it to the boarding house and set it in the front room, and then walked her to the hotel dining room and bought her a supper of roast beef and potatoes and green beans and pie. And while they ate, he told her about Birch Creek. He told her about his ranch, 40 acres, mostly grass, with a good well and a solid house, and a herd of 30 cattle that he ran alone because he could not afford a hand and would not take charity. He told her about his wife, Alma, who had died of consumption 4 years ago, and about the years since. The quiet, the work, the slow settling into a life that functioned but did not feel like living. He told her these things in a low, direct voice, without self-pity, the way you tell someone the facts of a situation because they deserve to know what they are walking into. Fern listened. She listened the way she had listened to thousands of students over 14 years. Carefully, attentively, hearing not just the words but the spaces between them. And in the spaces, she heard something that Ike Garrity was not saying, because he was not the kind of man who said it. He was lonely. He was deeply, structurally, fundamentally lonely, the way a house is cold when the fire has been out for years. "Mr. Garrity," she said, "why did you speak up on the platform?" He looked at his plate. "Because what Quarles said was wrong. Because you deserved better. Because—" He stopped. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Because I have been a widower for 4 years, and I have thought about placing an advertisement myself, but I have never done it, because I did not know what to write. And then Quarles placed his, and you answered it, and I watched you step off that coach, and I thought, she looks like she knows what she is doing. And then Quarles said that to you, and I could not stand there and say nothing. You thought I looked capable. I thought you looked like someone I would like to know." They sat in the dining room until the waitress began clearing the other tables, and then Ike walked her back to the boarding house and tipped his hat and said, "Good night, Miss Stokes," and walked back to his buckboard and drove 3 miles north to his empty ranch in the dark. And Fern stood at the boarding house window and watched his lantern disappear up the road and thought, "That is the first man in 20 years who has called me Miss Stokes, without making it sound like a consolation prize." The next morning, Leland Quarles sent word through the station agent that he had changed his mind and was willing to take her after all, now that he had thought it over. Fern sent word back through the same station agent that she had thought it over too, and her answer was no, and if Mr. Quarles wanted a woman who did not mind being inspected like cattle, he could look elsewhere. The station agent, who had witnessed the entire depot scene, delivered this message with visible satisfaction. Fern set down her fork. She had been evaluated, measured, weighed, and dismissed by Leland Quarles in under a minute. And in the same minute, this quiet man had looked at her and seen something worth defending. "Mr. Garrity, I am 36 years old. I have no money. I have a trunk full of books and 14 years of teaching children their letters. I am not young, and I am not pretty, and I have never been either of those things. But I am competent, and I am honest, and I am not afraid of work, and if you are looking for those qualities in a woman, then I would like very much to see your ranch." He drove her out to the ranch the next morning. The house was clean but bare. The kind of bare that happens when a man removes everything that reminds him of the woman he lost, and then cannot figure out what to put in its place. The kitchen had a good stove, and a bare table, and 2 chairs, and nothing on the walls. The barn was solid and well kept. The cattle looked healthy. The garden plot behind the house had been plowed but not planted. "I have not been good at the inside of things," Ike said, standing in the kitchen with his hat in his hands. "The inside of things is what I do," Fern said. She moved into the boarding house for propriety's sake and came to the ranch every day. She cooked meals that filled the house with smells Ike had not smelled in 4 years. She planted the garden. She organized the kitchen and put curtains in the windows and stacked the bookshelf she had asked him to build with the books from her trunk. Shakespeare and Dickens, and a set of McGuffey readers, and a battered atlas, and a Bible, with her grandmother's name inside the cover. She taught herself to milk the cow and mend the fence, and doctor a calf with scours, and Ike watched her learn, and never once corrected her in a way that was condescending, and she watched him watch her, and never once felt that she was being measured. What she felt, for the first time in 36 years, was seen, not as a teacher, not as a spinster, not as a woman who was too old, as Fern. In the evenings, she read aloud to him from the books on the shelf. She read Shakespeare, and he did not pretend to understand all of it, but he listened. And when she read the love sonnets, his face changed in a way that told her he understood those perfectly well. She read Dickens, and he laughed at Sam Weller, and shook his head at Scrooge and said, "That man needs a ranch. Hard work would sort him out." One evening in October she was reading by the lamp, and Ike was whittling a new handle for the hoe, and she looked up and found him watching her with an expression she had not seen before. Not the careful respect of the first weeks, but something warmer, something that had edges of wonder in it, as if he had just noticed something he should have noticed long ago. "What?" she said. "Nothing. You remind me of—" He stopped. He went back to his whittling. "Of Alma?" "No, of nobody. You remind me of nobody I have ever met. That is the point." He set the knife down. "Fern, every woman I have known in my life has reminded me of some other woman. My mother, my sister, my wife. You do not remind me of any of them. You are just you. I do not know what to do with that except to say that I like it." She smiled. It was a broad, unself-conscious smile, the kind she used to give her students when they got a hard problem right. And Ike saw it, and something in his face settled, as if he had been waiting for that smile without knowing he was waiting. They fell into a pattern. He drove to the boarding house every morning at 7 to pick her up, and she rode back with him to the ranch, and they worked side by side until supper. He showed her how to check the cattle for pink eye, and how to mend a gate hinge, and how to read the weather by the clouds over the western ridge. She showed him how to make cornbread that did not taste like sawdust, and how to fold a shirt so it did not look like it had been sat on by a horse. These were small things, but small things are the language of a courtship that is being conducted by 2 practical people who do not know how to be impractical and are not going to start now. On a Sunday evening in November, 2 months after she had stepped off the coach into Leland Quarles's dismissal and Ike Garrity's respect, they were sitting on the porch watching the sun go down behind the grass hills, and Ike said, "Fern." "Yes." "I have never been good at this." "You are better than you think." He turned to her. His blue eyes were steady and uncertain at the same time, which she had learned was his particular way of being brave. "I am 44 years old. I am not rich. I am not clever. I have a clean house and a good herd, and a shelf full of your books, and I do not want to go back to the way it was before you came. I am asking you to stay, not as a housekeeper, as my wife." Fern looked at him. She thought about the superintendent in Davenport, who had told her she was too old to teach. She thought about Leland Quarles, who had told her she was too old to marry. She thought about all the voices in all the rooms of her life that had told her she was too much, or too little, or too late. And then she looked at this quiet man on this porch, and heard the one voice that had never said any of those things. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." They were married in December by the minister in Birch Creek. Fern wore a blue wool dress she had sewn herself, and Ike wore his good shirt, and the whole town came, because the story of what had happened on the depot platform had traveled up and down Birch Creek like a brush fire, and every woman in the territory who had ever been told she was too old or too plain or too much wanted to see the ending. The minister said the words, and I kissed her, and someone in the back of the church said, "Right on time," and the congregation laughed, and Fern Garrity née Stokes, 36 years old, too old to be anyone's first choice, held her husband's arm and walked out of the church into the winter sunlight and thought, not too old, not too late, exactly right.